Hi everyone, we're Mimicker, here to introduce all kinds of knowledge, even this stuff we didn't know about. Welcome to the deep dive. Today we're plunging into a concept that's, well, it's a true ethical tightrope walk, especially within professions sworn to protect us. It's called noble cause corruption. Hmm. Our sources for this deep dive, they range from academic definitions, psychological insights, all the way to gripping real-world investigations and compelling case studies. Our mission today is to really understand how seemingly good intentions can twist into deeply unethical actions, and what that means for the very fabric of justice itself. It's an exploration into an area where the lines get blurrier than you might think, and the consequences, well, they're profound. Okay, let's unpack this.
Yeah, and what's so fascinating here, I think, is that we're not talking about personal greed.
Yeah.
Not really. Or outright malice. That's what most people think of when they hear corruption, right?
Yeah.
This is different. It's about a distorted sense of righteousness, where people believe they're doing something wrong, maybe technically wrong, but for what they are absolutely convinced are the right reasons, the noble reasons. And this tension, this internal struggle, it's particularly potent in public service roles, especially those that involve the authority to use force. That creates a kind of fertile ground for this paradox to take root, makes it an endemic risk, not just a few bad actors.
That sets a really intriguing stage. So let's get down to brass tacks.
Yeah.
When we talk about noble cause corruption, what exactly are we defining? What does that term truly mean for our deep dive?
Okay. At its core, noble cause corruption is, well, it's really about one thing, the outcome. It's the use of unethical or even illegal means to achieve goals that are perceived to be desirable, often, for the greater good. It's a mindset that basically says the goal is so good it justifies any means necessary to get there. What's absolutely critical is the perpetrator's conviction. They believe they are righteous. They're driven by this powerful moral commitment to make the world a safer place to live. It's almost never about self-interest or personal gain. You might also hear it called other things, like process corruption.
Ah, right, because it violates the process.
Exactly, or outcome-seeking misconduct, which again focuses on that end goal.
So it's that internal justification, that belief they're doing right, that really sets it apart. How does this kind of noble corruption then actually stand apart from, say, someone just taking a bribe or stealing money?
That's the critical distinction, yeah. Traditional corruption involves misusing an official position for direct personal gain. Could be economic gain, sexual favors, you name it. Noble cause corruption, on the other hand, is explicitly not for personal gain or revenge, but in an effort to fulfill a noble sentiment. Wow. And this leads to a truly startling paradox, one our sources really hammer home. Traditional corruption is usually blamed on rotten apples, right? Bad individuals within an otherwise good organization.
Standard narrative.
But noble cause corruption, it's frequently committed by the golden apples, the most dedicated, the most zealous, the seemingly most effective officers who, paradoxically, care too much about their work.
Wait, hang on. The most dedicated people are often the most vulnerable to this. That seems completely counterintuitive. Is it like their passion blinds them, or is there something else going on that targets the best people?
It's the insidious nature of it, really. A professional virtue, like this profound zeal for justice, it actually becomes the very vehicle for vice, the pathway to doing wrong. This makes prevention infinitely more complex because you can't just focus on weeding out bad people.
Right. You have to look at the good ones, too.
You have to address the excesses of your ostensibly good ones. It requires this fundamental shift in perspective. In fact, surveys reveal a pretty concerning subcultural value. Officers often view corruption for personal gain as far more serious than misconduct that appears to benefit society.
Oh, wow.
That subtle difference in perception that allows noble cause corruption to be rationalized and then eventually maybe even normalized within certain environments.
The implications of that are quite disturbing. And when we think about those implications, what philosophical ideas or ethical battles are really at play here? Is it a clash of moral frameworks that sets the stage?
Absolutely. This whole phenomenon is deeply rooted in what's called a utilitarian or teleological ethical system.
Teleological, meaning focused on the end goal.
Precisely. This is where the classic ends justify the means argument lives. An illegal or unethical act is justified if it produces a net positive result, like putting a dangerous criminal behind bars. It's often described as a cousin to situational ethics, meaning the rules become flexible depending on the situation, which you can see can easily normalize misconduct over time. This clashes directly with another major moral framework, Deontology.
Deontology.
Deontology says the morality of an action is inherent to the act itself. It's based on rules or duties, regardless of the outcome. So, from this perspective, fabricating evidence is intrinsically wrong, period.
Even if the person's guilty.
Even if the person is definitely guilty. The act itself is a violation. The process is paramount, not just the outcome. And professions like policing, well, they have an inherent occupational hazard here. They're granted the authority to use force to achieve public safety. That creates this permanent, unavoidable tension between the means and the ends. It's built into the job description in a way.
It feels like this idea, doing bad for good, it must have been wrestled with for ages. Can you walk us through its intellectual history a bit? Where did this concept of noble cause corruption really start to take root formally?
You're right. The underlying dilemma is ancient, absolutely. But the formal concept, the term and the framework, really started to crystallize in the 1980s. A criminologist named Carl B. Klockars, he laid the conceptual groundwork back in 1980 with this really seminal article, The Dirty Harry Problem.
Dirty Harry. Clint Eastwood.
Exactly. He used the 1971 film Dirty Harry as this powerful allegory for the moral quandaries police officers face when they believe a good end can only be achieved through dirty means. Klockars posed the foundational question, basically. When and to what extent does the morally good end warrant or justify an ethically, politically, or legally dangerous means to its achievement? He argued that a true Dirty Harry problem arises under very specific, almost impossible conditions.
Like what?
Like the end must be urgent and unquestionably good, and only dirty means, say, illegal entry, maybe even torture in the extreme hypothetical will actually work. It becomes this gut-wrenching choice between two wrongs. Uphold the rules and let a dangerous offender go free, or break the rules to stop them. It's a situation where, Klockars argued, you truly cannot emerge innocent.
So that was the dilemma, the problem.
Yeah.
But when did it actually get the name noble cause corruption? When did that become a recognized term?
That formal naming came a bit later, in 1989. It was from a philosopher, Edwin Delattre, in his very influential book, Character and Cops, Ethics in Policing. Delattre was deeply troubled by the idea that officers might justify questionable methods, like using force to get confessions, by appealing to the good outcome. He argued very clearly that some ways of acting were unacceptable, no matter how noble the end. Full stop. The act of naming it corruption, that was a critical, definitive ethical judgment. It explicitly rejected the idea that a noble motive could somehow sanitize or clean up an unethical act.
So the name itself is a statement.
Exactly. The term itself, noble cause corruption, is a deliberate paradox. It forces us to confront the inherent immorality of the means, even when the ends seem good. His book actually became a foundational text, often called the Bible of Police Ethics Training, really emphasizing that personal integrity and virtue are the only true bulwarks against wrongdoing.
It's powerful that the name forces that confrontation. Okay, so that's the theory, the naming. How did this abstract idea then, slam into the real world? Did we see it play out in major investigations?
Here's where it gets really interesting, and frankly, quite sobering. The theoretical concept was starkly illuminated by the Wood Royal Commission in Australia. This was a massive investigation into systemic corruption within the New South Wales Police Service running from 1994 to 1997. The commission uncovered this widespread pattern of misconduct they specifically called process corruption.
Process corruption, that's
Things like perjury, planting evidence, forging confessions, denying suspects their basic legal rights, all the stuff that undermines the legal process itself. Crucially, the commission's findings provided undeniable empirical evidence for the slippery slope argument.
The slippery slope, once you start.
Exactly. It showed that this process corruption, which officers often initially justified as necessary to secure convictions against bad guys, was frequently linked to traditional self-serving crimes, like extortion and theft. This exposed what the commission called the hypocrisy of the tag of noble cause corruption. It demonstrated that the line between doing wrong for a good reason and doing wrong for a purely selfish one is perilously thin and shockingly easy to cross. Once officers rationalized those initial ethical breaches for a noble cause, it eroded their moral foundation. It made more selfish transgressions easier to commit and justify later on.
That's incredibly insightful, that the very act of justifying one type of corruption can make you vulnerable to another. It's one thing to define it and trace its origins, but why do people dedicated to justice engage in these acts? What's actually going on in their minds that allows them to cross that line?
It's a really complex interplay of psychology and environment. The foundational rationalization is, as we discussed, that ends justify the means mindset. It can become a kind of subcultural belief in some places. To manage the profound cognitive dissonance, being a good person but doing a bad act, individuals employ these mental strategies. They're known as cognitive neutralization techniques.
Neutralization, like neutralizing guilt.
Precisely. They use these to make their conduct seem socially and morally acceptable even to themselves. Helps them sleep at night, basically. For instance, moral justification. This is when someone claims breaking rules is necessary to achieve a more important goal, like violating search laws to catch a dangerous felon. This doesn't just excuse the act, sometimes it even glorifies it. Then there's denial of victim. Here, they argue the violated party, say, a known drug dealer, isn't a legitimate victim anyway, so they don't deserve due process.
Dehumanizing them.
Exactly. Or denial of injury, convincing oneself no real harm was done. Like maybe stealing illicit drug profits from a criminal doesn't really hurt anyone legitimate. There's also denial of responsibility, shifting blame onto circumstances like, everyone else does it, or my supervisor basically told me to. And finally, social weighting. This is where they minimize their own misconduct by comparing it to the suspect's worst crimes. Makes their own actions seem trivial, almost insignificant by comparison.
That makes perfect sense. They're essentially building this mental scaffolding to justify the unjustifiable.
Yeah.
But is there an emotional component driving this too, or is it purely this kind of cognitive rationalization?
Oh, absolutely. There's a powerful emotional engine behind it. Criminologists Michael Caldero and John Crank describe it vividly as the scent of a victim's blood. See, most individuals enter professions like law enforcement with a strong moral commitment to help and protect the vulnerable. That's why they join. But the daily, visceral exposure to suffering, to victims, it can twist this noble intent. It creates this overwhelming emotional imperative to prevent future harm. It compels officers to focus exclusively on getting dangerous people off the streets, sometimes overriding their commitment to procedural justice. Rules seem less important than stopping the bad guy now.
So empathy can actually backfire.
It reveals a dark side to empathy, yes. Empathy for the victim can actually be weaponized against the suspect, dehumanizing them in the process. The accused is no longer seen as a person with rights, but just an object, a perp, or a lowlife, that needs to be neutralized. This emotional drive is often compounded by a growing skepticism, maybe a loss of faith in the formal criminal justice system, that can foster a belief that true justice has to be dispensed on the street, not in the courtroom.
That's a powerful and, frankly, disturbing insight into how empathy itself can be perverted. So it sounds like it's not just individual psychology at play here then. What about the environment, the workplace? What organizational and cultural factors foster this mindset?
You're spot on. Individual psychology doesn't operate in a vacuum. Several organizational and cultural factors really create a fertile ground for noble cause corruption. Performance pressure is a big one. Intense institutional pressure, maybe explicit or implicit, to achieve high arrest rates or reduce crime stats. That can incentivize officers to cut corners and bend rules to get those numbers up.
The pressure cooker effect.
Exactly. Then there's a results-oriented culture, an organization that overtly or implicitly prioritizes outcomes over processes, sends a clear message. The ends are more important than the means. Get the job done, don't worry too much about how. Peer pressure and the code of silence also play a massive role. The close-knit, solidarity-based culture, especially in policing, can create strong pressure to conform to group norms, even unethical ones.
Don't rock the boat.
Right. And this fosters a code of silence where misconduct goes unreported. Loyalty to peers trumps loyalty to the rules. Finally, a lack of accountability. Weak supervision, maybe inadequate oversight, a general lack of consequences for rule breaking. This creates an environment where officers believe they can act with impunity. This is often exacerbated by what's called supervisory cowardice, leaders who just fail to confront and discipline misconduct, maybe because it's easier not to. All these factors, they create this self-reinforcing feedback loop. They normalize the behavior, transforming what was once a conscious ethical breach into something that feels like standard acceptable practice, just how things are done.
That all paints a very clear, albeit unsettling, picture of why it happens. Okay, now let's get concrete. What does noble cause corruption actually look like on the ground? What are the specific actions we're talking about when someone is engaging in this?
Yeah, in law enforcement, there's a pretty consistent catalog of behaviors that form the dirty toolkit of noble cause corruption. These include things like fabricating and planting evidence, literally creating false evidence or placing contraband on a suspect to guarantee a conviction they believe is deserved. Then there's lying and falsifying reports. This includes committing perjury in court, which has the slang term testaling.
Testaling, wow.
Yeah, or just manipulating facts in official reports to maybe legitimize an illegal search or justify the use of force after the fact. Another one is coercing confessions, using intimidation, threats, maybe even excessive force to get someone to confess, whether they did it or not. We also see illegal searches and stops conducted without the legal justification of probable cause or a proper warrant, just acting on a hunch, but needing to make it look legal.
Cutting procedural corners.
Exactly. And abuse of authority. This covers misusing police power for things like contempt of cop arrests, basically punishing perceived disrespect, or issuing sewer tickets.
Sewer tickets, what are those?
That's when an officer writes a citation but then just discards it, maybe throws it away. The citizen never gets it, fails to appear in court, and then a warrant is issued for their arrest. It's a way to hassle someone. And finally, tainting identification procedures, improperly influencing a witness's identification. For example, showing them just a single photo of the person they think did it instead of a proper, unbiased lineup.
It sounds like a playbook straight out of some cynical crime drama, except this is terrifyingly real. Can you give us some real-world case studies that truly bring this theory to life, beyond just listing the actions?
Absolutely. And the pattern laudable goal, unethical means, disastrous outcome, is shockingly consistent across different fields, not just policing. Consider the Boston Lewin case in policing. The noble cause was absolutely clear. The convict, a dangerous criminal everyone knew was guilty. The means involved perjury, fabricating an informant to get a search warrant, bending the rules significantly, the outcome. An officer was tragically killed during the raid that resulted from that faulty warrant. And because the misconduct came out, all charges, including the officer's murder, were dismissed against the suspect.
So the attempt to guarantee conviction actually freed him.
Exactly. It's a stark, tragic example of how dirty means can completely backfire and lead to the guilty going free. Then there's the infamous Lawyer X case from Australia. This spanned both policing and the legal profession. The noble cause, dismantling powerful, organized crime syndicates. A worthy goal, the means. Using a prominent criminal defense lawyer as a secret police informant against her own clients. A massive ethical breach. This led to widespread miscarriages of justice, numerous overturned convictions years later, and a profound erosion of legal ethics and trust in the entire system down there.
Wow.
In another policing example, Joseph Hoadley, an officer. His noble cause, maybe smaller scale, was maintaining authority, securing an arrest he felt was justified. His means included falsifying a police report, tampering with a witness, and destroying evidence, all to cover up excessive force he used. The outcome was a federal conviction and imprisonment for Hoadley himself, significantly undermining his department's credibility. And like I said, noble cause corruption isn't exclusive to law enforcement. Look at Theranos in the business and tech world.
Right, Elizabeth Holmes.
Yeah. The stated noble cause was revolutionizing healthcare, making blood testing cheap and accessible for everyone. A fantastic goal. The means: defrauding investors, systematically misrepresenting the technology, faking lab results on a massive scale. This resulted in the company's complete collapse, criminal convictions for fraud, and potential harm to patients who relied on faulty tests. And even in religion, you see parallels. The case of Father Murphy is a horrific example. The perceived noble cause, for some involved, was protecting the reputation and institution of the Catholic Church. The means involved covering up serial sexual abuse of children, moving abusive priests around, and in some instances even trying to frame the abuse as a holy act. The outcome was justice denied for countless victims and a massive ongoing institutional scandal that has eroded public trust globally. What these cases, especially the law enforcement ones, really reveal is something critical. The initial act of noble cause corruption often necessitates a secondary layer of misconduct.
The cover-up.
Exactly, the cover-up. Falsifying reports, tampering with witnesses, destroying evidence, these aren't just primary acts sometimes. They become essential to concealing the original transgression. It creates this downward spiral of escalating criminality where each unethical act requires another one just to sustain the lie.
It's truly a cascading effect of misconduct. And it seems like this isn't just limited to these real-world examples, but it also shows up constantly in popular culture, doesn't it? How do those portrayals impact our understanding, maybe even acceptance of noble cause corruption?
They absolutely do. The concept of noble cause corruption is a powerful and recurring theme in popular culture, movies, TV shows. And these portrayals, they're not just entertainment. They can serve as a potent social mechanism for normalizing and sometimes even glorifying that ends justify the means ethos. The 1971 film Dirty Harry, which we mentioned earlier, that's the archetypal representation. It presents a heroic police officer who uses illegal methods to stop a vicious killer, and the narrative implicitly justifies his actions. He's the hero, after all. More recently, the TV series Dexter offers a really extreme and incredibly popular example.
Oh yeah, the serial killer who kills other killers.
Right. The protagonist is a police forensics expert who moonlights as a serial killer, but he exclusively targets other murderers who've escaped the formal justice system. The show masterfully portrays him as this sympathetic anti-hero. It desensitizes viewers to his horrific crimes by framing them as a kind of necessary public service. He's doing the dirty work the system can't. This repeated exposure, seeing the rule-breaking hero get results, it can actually shape false public notions about corruption. It creates this cultural narrative where such actions are seen as not only acceptable, but sometimes even necessary.
And that makes it harder to demand accountability in the real world.
Exactly. It can foster a social and political climate with less public will to demand accountability for procedural violations. It subtly weakens the institutional guardrails against real-world, noble cause corruption because the public might think, well, sometimes you have to break the rules.
That's a crucial point about how popular culture can subtly shift our ethical expectations. All of this, it just sounds incredibly damaging. What are the actual ripple effects of noble cause corruption? What are the true costs, both for individuals and for society as a whole?
Well, the ultimate gut-wrenching paradox of noble cause corruption is that in its zealous pursuit of a just outcome, it actually produces the most profound injustices. One of the most catastrophic results is convicting the innocent. Organizations like the Innocence Project have exposed hundreds and hundreds of cases. Individuals imprisoned for decades, some even on death row, due to misconduct like coerced false confessions, improper eyewitness IDs, perjured testimony by officers, all hallmarks of noble cause corruption. The intense pressure to secure a conviction can lead to what's called tunnel vision. Investigators get locked onto a suspect and ignore exculpatory evidence, pursuing them with this unwavering and ultimately incorrect certainty.
So it not only puts innocent people behind bars, but you mentioned earlier, it can also lead to dangerous people being let go.
Precisely. It cuts both ways, tragically. Conversely, when acts of noble cause corruption are discovered, the planted evidence, the perjury, that can completely shatter the prosecution's case. And that leads to the freeing the guilty. The 1988 case of Albert Lewin in Boston, the one where the officer was killed, that's the prime example. After the detective fabricated information for the warrant, the officer died during the raid. When that perjury was exposed, all charges against Lewin, including the murder of a police officer, were dismissed. The dirty means used to secure justice ended up guaranteeing injustice and allowing a dangerous person, by all accounts, to walk free.
Beyond these devastating individual cases, how does this impact our fundamental faith in the justice system itself? How does it erode that basic foundation of trust we need?
It strikes right at the very heart of the relationship between the public and the institutions sworn to protect them. It leads to a profound erosion of public trust. It fundamentally damages the reputation of the agency involved, and often the profession as a whole. Think about it. The entire criminal justice system is built on the premise that officers are truthful, that the evidence is real, that the process is fair. When officers lie in reports or on the witness stand, they don't just compromise a single case. They devalue the credibility of all officers. They undermine public confidence in the system's legitimacy entirely.
You sort of wonder, who can you believe?
Exactly. This breach of public trust is a fundamental violation of an officer's oath and the democratic principles of a free society. We depend on a legal system that remains consistently just and refrains from coercion and intimidation. Noble cause corruption directly attacks that.
And what about the organizations themselves? What kind of decay does this cause internally when this kind of behavior is allowed to fester or is maybe even tacitly encouraged?
Oh, the damage caused by noble cause corruption extends deep within the organization itself. It leads to significant institutional decay and liability. Agencies that tolerate this kind of behavior, they face severe consequences, including legal and financial liability. Think massive civil rights lawsuits, costly settlements, potentially federally mandated consent decrees that can cripple a department's budget and autonomy for years. When unethical behavior is justified, excused, or goes unpunished, it leads to the normalization of toxic culture. Misconduct just becomes the way things are done, leading to a broader decline in moral and ethical standards across the board. For the officers themselves, there's a significant loss of moral compass. Those who engage in noble cause corruption, they risk their jobs, criminal charges, and that potential slide down the slippery slope into more serious, perhaps even self-serving forms of corruption later on.
And the good officers,
Yeah.
the ones who don't do this.
That's the other internal damage. It causes immense damage to internal morale. The presence of this kind of corruption has a tremendously negative impact on honest officers. They might fear retaliation for reporting wrongdoing. They might become cynical, disillusioned with their profession. Why follow the rules if others don't and get promoted? The most profound consequence, ultimately, isn't just the harm to one case or one officer. It's the corruption of the system of justice itself. When evidence is planted, it casts doubt on all evidence. When testimony is falsified, it devalues all testimony. Noble cause corruption attacks the very foundational premises of the legal system. It creates a crisis of legitimacy that can take generations to repair.
It's an incredibly destructive force, from top to bottom. So we've explored what it is, where it came from, how it happens psychologically and culturally, and its absolute devastating consequences. This golden apple paradox, where the best intentions can lead to the worst outcomes. It's truly unsettling. It's the big question. How do we prevent it? What's the way forward to safeguard the integrity of justice?
You're right to call it unsettling. It's often, paradoxically, a crime of the most committed individuals, where the noble cause itself, when it's unchecked, leads directly to abuse. Our sources really emphasize that integrity isn't some fixed trait you either have or don't. It's more like a perishable skill.
Perishable. Like it needs practice.
Exactly. It requires constant maintenance, reinforcement, practice, just like any other critical skill. So the pathways to prevention, they require a multifaceted approach, one that truly values the integrity of the process just as much as the desirability of the outcome. One crucial pathway is comprehensive and continuous ethical training and education. And this needs to start right in the academy and be reinforced throughout an officer's entire career. It has to move beyond just abstract principles. It needs to explicitly define noble cause corruption, detail its corrosive consequences, and actively challenge that ends-oriented utilitarian mindset head-on. Then there's the absolute need for strong ethical leadership. Leaders set the ethical tone for any organization. They must model and enforce procedural justice. They have to demonstrate through their own actions that the means are just as important as the ends. This requires real moral courage from supervisors, the courage to confront and discipline subordinate misconduct even when it's uncomfortable, rather than tolerating it for the sake of maybe looking good on the stats sheet.
Holding the line.
Holding the line. Robust accountability is also paramount. Transparent, consistently applied accountability systems are probably the single most effective deterrents to misconduct. This includes meaningful internal affairs investigations, perhaps external oversight where appropriate, and critically, creating a culture that protects and supports officers who do report wrongdoing. You have to break that code of silence.
Make it safe to speak up.
Make it safe and make it the expected thing to do. Finally, systemic and cultural reform is often necessary. Prevention requires shifting organizational culture away from purely metrics-based performance evaluations, like arrest quotas, which we know can incentivize shortcuts and rule bending. Adopting things like community-oriented policing models, for example, can help by emphasizing connectedness, building public trust, and making officers more directly accountable to the community they serve, not just to internal stats.
That's a comprehensive approach. Definitely touches on multiple levels. Are there any statistics or interesting facts that help us maybe quantify the scale of this challenge? It feels so pervasive sometimes.
Yeah, it's tricky because the secretive nature of corruption makes precise measurement really difficult. But available data does provide some important context. For instance, one 7-year study found that approximately 1,100 police officers are arrested annually in the United States. A separate analysis, looking at the years 2005-2011, calculated a nationwide arrest rate for officers of about 0.72 per 1,000.
How does that compare to the general public?
Well, the arrest rate for law enforcement officers is actually significantly lower than for the general public. However, the impact of their crimes is hugely magnified because of their position of authority and the public trust they hold. One corrupt officer does far more damage than one corrupt citizen. And perhaps one of the most concerning statistics, coming back to that predisposition, research has found that approximately 1/3, about 33% of all incoming police academy cadets enter with a primarily teleological or ends-oriented ethical ideology.
1/3, right from the start.
Right from the start. This puts them at a statistically higher risk for engaging in noble cause corruption from the very beginning of their careers, before the job even shapes them further. So what does this all mean for us?
It means, I think, that the solution to noble cause corruption isn't to diminish the passion for a noble cause. That drive for justice is crucial. But it's about cultivating an equally powerful commitment to the nobility of the process itself. Because, and this is maybe the thought to leave you with, if an outcome, no matter how desired, no matter how seemingly just, is achieved through unjust means, is it truly justice at all? What does that really mean for the systems we rely on, the systems designed to protect us? That's something we're thinking about long after our deep dive ends today. Thanks for tuning into this episode. If you enjoyed our content, don't forget to like, subscribe, and turn on the notification bell.